There's a kind of stillness that descends after a barrier breaks. Not the peaceful kind, but the breathless, altar-like kind that makes you question whether you've just committed an act of devotion or destruction. Angel Davis knew that stillness intimately. She'd been bracing for it, bargaining with it, accepting it as the price of her father's sins. What she hadn't braced for was the way Kim Min-ho would stare at the crimson stain on white silk, his tattooed chest rising and falling like a war drum, as though she'd just offered him something sacred from a world he'd been exiled from long ago, something he had no right to accept and no strength to refuse. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from. And if you feel it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference. The Sky Tower penthouse hung above Seoul like a glass shrine to beautiful brutality, 40 stories of steel and silence where the Han River glittered below like a dragon's spine. It was a cage disguised as a palace, with floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the neon chaos of Gangnam back at itself and marble floors so polished they caught every breath, every hesitation, every lie. Angel had been living there for 3 weeks, ever since her father's gambling debts to the Jumyeong syndicate had reached 500 million won, a number so staggering it might as well have been carved into her skin with a knife. And in a way, it had been. Because when you owe money to the Kangpai, you don't settle accounts with wire transfers and payment plans. You pay with collateral, with blood ties, with daughters who become bargaining chips in games they never agreed to play. Her father had sobbed when Minho's men arrived at their cramped Itaewon apartment. Not for her, Angel understood with brutal clarity, but for himself, for his shame, for his stupidity, for the fact that he'd been foolish enough to believe he could outrun the tiger's den with nothing but bluster and desperation. He'd sobbed as they led her to the black sedan with windows tinted dark as a funeral, sobbed as she turned one last time to see the yellowed walls of the only home she'd known in this foreign country, sobbed until the car turned the corner and he disappeared into the city's indifferent crowd. And then she'd stopped looking back. There was no mercy in the rearview mirror. Only the neon-soaked present and whatever fate awaited her in the clouds above Seoul, in the fortress of a man whose body was a living testament to violence, whose reputation preceded him like the smell of smoke before fire. Only survival mattered now. Only endurance. Only the stubborn, foolish hope that somewhere beneath the ink and the ice, Kim Min-ho was still human enough to be reasoned with. She'd had 3 weeks to learn she was wrong. And right. And that the truth was infinitely more complicated than either. The elevator to the 40th floor required a keycard and a thumbprint. Angel watched the enforcer, a stone-faced man who'd introduced himself only as Kong, press his thumb to the scanner with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The doors whispered open onto a private foyer where the air smelled like leather and something darker, something medicinal she couldn't name. "Wait here," Kong said in heavily accented English, gesturing to a chair that probably cost more than her father's entire debt. She didn't sit. Her legs wouldn't allow it, locked rigid with the kind of fear that transcends language and culture. Through the massive windows, Seoul sprawled beneath her like a circuit board, all light and geometry and indifference. She could see Namsan Tower blinking red in the distance, a lighthouse for a city that had swallowed her whole. The door to the inner sanctum opened without sound. Kim Min-ho didn't walk into the room so much as materialize within it, as though he'd always been there and she'd simply failed to notice. He was younger than she'd imagined, early 30s, perhaps, but there was nothing young about his eyes. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen the bottom of too many graves, who'd made peace with darkness so long ago he'd forgotten what sunlight felt like. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the serpentine curl of black ink that climbed his throat like vines reclaiming a temple. More tattoos disappeared beneath the fabric, mapping violence across skin she had no desire to see. He studied her the way one might study a balance sheet. Clinical. Detached. Already calculating her value. Angel Davis. His English was flawless, barely touched by accent. Your father owes me 500 million won. He cannot pay. It wasn't a question. She nodded anyway, throat too dry for words. You will remain here until the debt is satisfied. You will not leave this floor without permission. You will not contact anyone outside these walls. You will not test my patience. He paused, something flickering behind those dead eyes. I am not a charitable man, Miss Davis, but I am not needlessly cruel. Behave, and you will find this cage comfortable enough. He turned to leave, dismissing her as easily as one dismisses servants. How long? The words escaped before she could stop them. Minho glanced back, and for just a heartbeat, she saw something almost resembling pity. Until I say otherwise. The penthouse was a labyrinth of closed doors and unanswered questions. Angel spent the first 3 days mapping its geography like a prisoner studying escape routes, though she knew there was nowhere to run 40 stories above the earth. Most rooms were locked, their secrets sealed behind biometric scanners she had no hope of bypassing. But on the 4th morning, restless and desperate for anything to occupy her spiraling thoughts, she found one door that yielded to her touch. The room beyond stole her breath. Paintings covered every wall, not the garish modern art she'd expected from a gangster's trophy room, but delicate ink-wash landscapes rendered in shades of gray and charcoal. Mountains emerged from mist like sleeping giants. Bamboo bent beneath invisible wind. A lone fisherman waited on a river that seemed to breathe. Each piece was ensigned, hung with museum precision, and utterly at odds with everything she knew about the man who lived here. She was studying a particularly haunting piece, a crane in flight, its wings dissolving into smoke, when she felt the change in air pressure that announced she was no longer alone. That one is called Leaving the World Behind. Minho's voice came from the doorway, surprisingly soft. He'd shed the dress shirt for a simple black t-shirt that revealed the full canvas of ink covering his arms, dragons and tigers, skulls and chrysanthemums, all the violent poetry of the Yakuza tradition etched into flesh. The crane symbolizes transcendence. Escape from earthly suffering. Angel turned slowly, bracing for fury at her trespass. Instead, she found him staring at the painting with something that looked dangerously close to longing. You painted these, she said. Not a question. A muscle ticked in his jaw. A lifetime ago. He moved into the room with careful reverence, hands clasped behind his back as though afraid he might contaminate something pure. This close, she could see the finer details of his tattoos, the incredible artistry, the hours of pain each one represented. Armor, she realized suddenly. That's what they were. Protection against a world that demanded he be a monster. My grandfather was a calligrapher, Minho continued, still not looking at her. He believed ink could capture what words could not. Truth. Grief. The weight of choices that cannot be unmade. He finally met her eyes, and she saw the chasm there, the distance between who he'd wanted to be and who circumstances had forced him to become. I stopped painting the day I inherited his debts instead of his brushes. Angel understood then. The tattoos were his mask. But these paintings, these whispers of mist and longing, these were his soul. The piano woke her at 2 a.m, its melody threading through the penthouse like smoke under doors. Angel lay in the guest room's unfamiliar darkness, listening to Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major played with the kind of technical precision that could only come from years of disciplined practice. But there was something wounded in the interpretation, something that turned beauty into mourning. She found him in the living room, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Seoul's sleepless cityscape. He didn't pause when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence, simply continued coaxing heartbreak from ivory keys with tattooed fingers that should have been made for breaking bones, not making music. When the last note faded, the silence felt heavier than the melody. I can't sleep, he said finally, still facing the piano. Haven't been able to for years. The music is beautiful. Angel moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. Sad, but beautiful. Chopin understood suffering. Minho turned, and in the ambient glow of the city, the shadows carved his face into something almost vulnerable. Do you drink whiskey, Miss Davis? Angel, she corrected softly. And yes. He poured 2 glasses of something amber and expensive, handed her one with careful formality. They stood at the window, 2 strangers trapped in a glass tower, watching the city breathe below. My brother was the good one, Minho said abruptly, as though the confession had been building pressure for too long. Minjun, brilliant. Medical school. He was going to be a surgeon, save lives the way our grandfather saved beauty with his brushes. He took a long drink. The syndicate came for our family when I was 22. Old debts, blood obligations, the kind of inheritance you can't refuse without consequences. They told me I had a choice, take my grandfather's place at the head of the Jumyeong branch, or watch them collect payment from Minjun instead. Angel felt her chest tighten. So you chose. I chose. The words carried the weight of a decade. I told myself it would be temporary. That I'd find a way out, eventually. But the Yakuza don't grant retirement packages, Angel. Once you're baptized in blood, you wear the ink until it's buried with you. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the truth he'd been hiding behind violence and silence. I never wanted to be this. I know, she whispered, and meant it. The black sedan appeared on the 3rd Tuesday, idling across from the Sky Tower's entrance like a patient predator. Angel noticed it from the 40th floor window while watering the orchids Minho kept in his study, delicate white blooms that seemed impossibly fragile in a place built for violence. She mentioned it to Kong, who went rigid, made a phone call in rapid Korean, and within minutes the penthouse became a fortress humming with armed men speaking in clipped, urgent tones. Minho returned early, his face a mask of cold fury barely contained. Chairman Park's people, he said without preamble, pouring himself whiskey with hands that didn't quite steady. The Songdong faction. They know you're here. Angel's blood went cold. Why would they care about me? Because you're leverage. He drained the glass in one swallow. In our world, affection is weakness. Care is a blade someone will eventually use to cut you. He set the glass down with controlled precision. They'll try to take you. Use you to negotiate territory, or worse, to prove I've gone soft, that I'm compromised by a foreign woman who has no business in Korean affairs. Then send me away. The words came out steadier than she felt. I'll disappear. Go back to America. You'll be dead within a month. Minho cut her off, his eyes fierce. They've already seen you. Returning you would signal weakness just as surely as losing you would. There's only one way to make you untouchable in this world, Angel. She understood before he said it. Marriage. He moved closer, and she could see the war being waged behind his eyes. Not real, a contract. Legal protection. You'd carried the Kim name, and in our circles, that name is a shield. Even Park wouldn't risk the full-scale war that would come from touching a registered Kim family member. You're asking me to marry you to save my life. I'm asking you to marry me to save both our lives. His voice dropped lower, almost gentle. I won't touch you. You'd have your own wing, your own life. Just a signature on paper and a ceremony for appearances. But you'd be safe. Angel looked at this man who played Chopin at midnight, who painted cranes dissolving into smoke, who'd sacrificed his entire future for a brother she'd never met. She thought about the black sedan waiting below like death on a timer, about her father's debts written in her flesh, about the strange sanctuary she'd found in this glass cage above Seoul. When? She asked. The relief in his eyes was almost painful to witness. Friday. The wedding was a sterile affair, no flowers, no music, just a government official who asked no questions and witnesses who knew better than to remember faces. Angel wore a simple white dress purchased that morning. Minho wore black, his tattoos hidden beneath expensive fabric, his expression carved from stone. They signed papers in an office that smelled like old documents and bureaucratic indifference. When the official declared them married, Minho didn't kiss her. He simply nodded once, a soldier acknowledging orders received. The return to the penthouse felt like riding an elevator into a different dimension. Minho poured them both whiskey in the living room, the city glittering 40 stories below like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Neither spoke. The contract sat between them like a third presence, practical, bloodless, safe. Angel told herself that's what this was. A transaction. A strategic alliance. Nothing more. But when Minho's eyes met hers across the rim of his glass, she saw something that made her breath catch. Not the cold calculation she'd expected. Something hungrier. Something that looked dangerously close to want. "We don't have to," he started. "I know," she interrupted softly. "But what if I want to?" The glass trembled slightly in his hand before he set it down with careful control. "Angel. You don't owe me anything. This marriage is protection, not payment. I'm not paying a debt." She closed the distance between them, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm making a choice." What happened next was neither gentle nor brutal, but something in between, urgent and careful, terrifying and inevitable. Minho touched her like she might shatter, his tattooed hands reverent against her skin. She pulled him closer, claiming him as surely as he claimed her, and for those suspended moments, they were neither prisoner nor captor, neither gangster nor innocent, just two people trying to find something real in a world built on lies. Afterward, in the amber glow of the bedside lamp, Minho went absolutely still. Angel followed his gaze to the white silk sheets beneath them, to the stark crimson stain that looked almost black in the low light. She watched his face transform, shock giving way to something that looked like devastation, like awe, like grief. "You were pure." His voice came out broken, barely above a whisper. His chest heaved with each breath, tattoos rippling like living things across his skin. "You were pure, and you gave it to me? To a devil like me? Minho. I don't deserve this." He touched the stain with shaking fingers, then pulled back as though burned. "I don't deserve you." Angel caught his face between her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Then become someone who does." The 2 weeks that followed felt like living in a snow globe, fragile, beautiful, somehow separate from the chaos of the world outside. Minho transformed in ways Angel hadn't thought possible. He started sleeping through the night with her wrapped in his arms, his breathing finally peaceful against her hair. He brought her coffee in the mornings, learned to say, "I love you," in English with an accent that made her chest ache. He even smiled, rare, genuine smiles that made him look years younger, like the artist he'd been before violence claimed him. They painted together in his studio, her clumsy watercolors beside his masterful brushwork. He taught her Korean phrases, laughing when she mangled the pronunciation. At night, he played piano while she read, and the penthouse stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling dangerously close to home. Angel should have known peace like that couldn't last. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Minho's phone rang while they were having lunch, and she watched his face drain of color as he listened. When he finally spoke, his voice was glacier cold, every word precisely controlled. "If you touch her, Park, I will erase your entire bloodline from this earth." He hung up, his hands white-knuckled around the phone. "What did he say?" Angel asked, though dread was already pooling in her stomach. "He called you my foreign pet." Minho's eyes were black with rage. "He said he wants to see if you're as entertaining as the rumors suggest." "Minho. You don't leave the penthouse. Not for anything. I'm doubling security. He was already texting rapidly, issuing orders. Park is testing me, seeing how far he can push before I snap. Angel agreed, of course. She stayed inside for 3 days, watching Minho pace like a caged animal, fielding calls at all hours. On the 4th day, cabin fever drove her to beg Kong to take her to the art supply store in Insadong. Just 30 minutes, just to feel human again. Kong reluctantly agreed. The market was crowded, vibrant with afternoon shoppers and tourists. Angel was comparing sketchbooks when Kang's phone rang. He stepped away, just for a moment, speaking urgently into the device. She turned to call him back, to show him the brushes she'd selected, and that's when the hand clamped over her mouth. The cloth pressed against her face smelled sweet and chemical. The world tilted, blurred, went dark. Her last conscious thought was of Minho's face that morning, kissing her goodbye, whispering, "Come back to me." She'd promised she would. Now she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. Minho received the video at 9 p.m., Angel bound to a chair in what looked like a warehouse, her lips split, fear raw in her eyes. Chairman Park's voice came through distorted, "Come alone to Club Biko in Songdong-gu by midnight, or I start sending her back to you in pieces." Kong tried to argue for backup, for strategy, for anything resembling a plan. Minho silenced him with a look that could cut steel. In his bedroom, he stripped off the tailored suit that made him look civilized, revealing the full masterpiece of ink that covered his torso, dragons coiling around his ribs, a tiger stalking across his back, chrysanthemums blooming over his heart like prayers for the dead. He pulled on black tactical gear, checked the magazine of his Glock, and slid 2 knives into sheaths at his thighs. When he looked in the mirror, he no longer saw the man who'd learned to love. He saw the kangpai he'd been forged into, the weapon his grandfather's debts had created. Club Biko pulsed with bass that you could feel in your bones, neon washing the entrance in blood-red light. Minho walked through the front door like he owned it, and the crowd parted instinctively, sensing the violence radiating from him like heat from a furnace. Park's men were waiting, 6 of them, armed, forming a corridor that led to the VIP section where their boss sat on a leather throne, Angel kneeling beside him with a gun pressed casually to her temple. "Kim Minho," Park smiled, yellowed teeth flashing. "So predictable. Love makes us all." Minho shot the man holding Angel before Park finished his sentence. Chaos erupted. Bodies collided in the strobe-lit darkness, fists and blades and gunshots creating a symphony of brutality. Minho moved through them like water finding cracks in stone, efficient, lethal, unstoppable. He took a punch that split his eyebrow, barely felt it. Redirected a knife thrust and buried his own blade in someone's shoulder. The dragon on his ribs seemed to writhe with each breath, alive with the violence it was always meant to represent. He reached Angel as Park raised his gun. She screamed his name in warning, but Minho was already moving, already positioning himself between her and the barrel. The shot went wide. Park lunged with a knife instead, silver flashing in the neon. Minho twisted, shielding Angel with his body, and felt the blade punch through fabric and skin, sliding between his ribs with a cold certainty that took his breath away. He didn't stop. He couldn't. With blood spreading hot across his side, Minho's fist connected with Park's jaw, once, twice, until the man crumpled unconscious at his feet. "Angel," Minho gasped, already swaying. "Angel, I've got you." Then the world tilted, and he fell. Minho drifted through fever dreams where dragons bled into ink and Angel's voice called him back from darkness. The private hospital in Gangnam asked no questions when Kong carried him in. Certain establishments in Seoul understood the economics of discretion. The knife had missed his lung by centimeters, but infection set in within hours, turning his body into a battlefield. Angel refused to leave his bedside. When the doctor suggested she rest, she simply stared at them until they backed away. She learned to change bandages with steady hands, to read the monitors that beeped his heartbeat into the sterile air, to wipe sweat from his burning forehead during the long nights when death circled like a patient predator. She whispered to him in English, prayers, memories, threats that if he dared die after surviving that nightclub massacre, she'd find a way to drag him back just to kill him herself. On the fourth day, his eyes finally opened. Angel. Her name came out like gravel, his voice destroyed from the intubation. You're safe. You're an idiot. Tears cut clean tracks down her exhausted face. You almost died. You almost left me in this world alone because you had to play hero. She gripped his hand hard enough to hurt. I can't do this, Minho. I can't watch you bleed out in nightclubs. I can't spend my life waiting for someone to deliver your body in pieces. If you love me, if any of this means anything, you leave this life. Today. Now. Or I leave you. She meant it. He could see it in her eyes, the same fierce determination that had made her give herself to a devil and demand he become something better. Okay, he whispered. Okay? She looked stunned, as though she'd been bracing for an argument. Okay. Minho squeezed her hand with what little strength he had. I'll call Kong. He's wanted the territory for years, he's earned it. I'll hand over the operations, the contacts, everything. There are protocols for retirement if you're willing to pay the price. He managed something close to a smile. Turns out almost dying clarifies priorities. 3 weeks later, Minho Kim officially dissolved his ties to the Jumneung Syndicate. The exit cost him most of his assets, the respect of men who only understood loyalty measured in blood, and a reputation built over a decade. He didn't regret a single one. Standing in the hospital parking lot with Angel's hand in his, watching Seoul's neon skyline pulse with life that would continue with or without him, Minho finally understood what his grandfather had meant about ink capturing truth. Some stains wash away. Others transform you. 6 months transformed Seoul from a prison into a home. The Art Foundation occupied a renovated hanok in Bukchon, all traditional wooden beams and modern glass, where Minho taught underprivileged youth the grandfather's techniques he'd abandoned for a decade. His hands, once instruments of violence, now guided brushes across rice paper, creating beauty instead of wielding blades. The tattoos remained, permanent reminders of the man he'd been, but they no longer defined him. They were simply ink now, not prophecy. Angel's belly had grown round with their son, and Minho treated her pregnancy like the most precious artwork he'd ever been entrusted with. He painted the nursery himself, gentle landscapes of mountains and cranes, bamboo forests and fishermen on quiet rivers. He read parenting books with the same intensity he'd once studied syndicate territories. At night, he played Chopin for their unborn child, his insomnia finally conquered by purpose that had nothing to do with survival. The labor lasted 14 hours. Minho held Angel's hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement in Korean and English, his face pale with the kind of fear no knife fight had ever produced. When their son finally arrived, screaming his arrival with lungs that promised he'd inherited his mother's fierce spirit, Minho wept openly, his tears falling onto the tiny fist that gripped his tattooed finger with surprising strength. He's perfect, Angel breathed, exhausted and radiant. He's absolutely perfect. Like his mother. Minho kissed her forehead, tasting salt and joy and relief that they'd both survived to see this moment. They named him David Minjun Kim, honoring both her American roots and the brother Minho had sacrificed everything to protect. The baby had Angel's dark skin and Minho's sharp features, a living bridge between worlds that had tried so hard to keep them apart. Later, while Angel slept and dawn painted Seoul in shades of gold, Minho held his son against the window of their private room. The city sprawled below, neon fading in daylight, and he thought about the man he'd been, the enforcer, the Kangpai, the devil who'd believed his hands could only destroy. I'm going to be better for you, he whispered to the sleeping infant. I'm going to show you that ink can create beauty. That violence doesn't have to be inheritance. That love is stronger than any legacy of blood. David stirred, tiny mouth forming something that might have been a smile. Behind them, Angel watched through half-closed eyes, her heart finally understanding what home felt like. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from. And if you felt it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt this story was really worth listening to, click the super thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue creating stories that touch the soul.